This webinar is called The Scope of Agile. As you may have read in the webinar description, it's in response to organizations that are saying we're going agile, we're becoming agile. And it does beg the question of trying to answer that. Now, I'm seeing a hand up. If you've got your hand up, I see, yeah, so just thank you. So what we want to do is take a look at what that possibly means, what's intended by that, and make some recommendations about the kinds of implications it has, have some recommendations about what you should be doing. My name is Christine Thompson. My email address is on the screen. This would be another way to pose your questions, by the way. You can send me an email. So christine.thompson@webagesolutions.com. I've been involved with architecture for coming up almost on 2 decades, doing consulting and training work, and supporting the efforts in WebAge Solutions for their different architecture programs. So I'm happy to be here to lead this discussion on bringing in Agile to the organization and what the possibilities are for it. On that note, you will see that we have at WebAge an Agile architecture curriculum. So this is a layout, a visual layout of the courses. The first course is Agile Introduction, and that course, it's just a 2-day course, is meant for all members of an Agile team to have the chance to look at the bigger picture, to make sure everybody understands what we mean by architecture, what we mean by Agile, and then to start discussing about the challenges that we face and coming up with maybe the beginning of a plan to help mitigate some of the issues. What we have here on the left that's in the purple circle is the course Architecture for Agile Projects, and the content we're discussing today is actually part of a unit that's in that course. So it's part of the early discussions that we have in trying to set up our architecture for Agile projects. So if you are trying to get architecture work done with software development, then that's a course that could help you make sure that you understand the implications and that you've covered everything off. Looking over onto the right of the screen, you'll see the Agile Solution Architecture Program. So that stream is looking at ways in which to support many projects across the enterprise. So there are common things that happen on any given project that is using an Agile approach, and the Agile Solution Architecture Program is meant to help address and support those things that are common, as well as to be there to mitigate issues that come up that are unique to a particular project. And as you can see at the bottom, we have a course called the Agile Governance Plan, and this one could be combined with the Architecture for Agile Projects, making it into a 4-day course. The same thing for the Agile Solution Architecture Program, we can couple it in, or you could just take the Agile Governance Plan. And it's really looking at Agile stakeholder management, Agile requirements management, and governance frameworks, so that you can actually build up that infrastructure to support Agile work. Now, obviously, we're showing you this because we want you to realize that there's a lot more support we can give you in your Agile work, but it also does feed into the discussion we're having today. Normally, when we're thinking of Agile, or certainly what I've seen in most organizations, is it's just a focus on software development. It's on a methodology for doing software development. And perhaps the only thing that you can see might connect would be this course here on the left. But as we're going to see, that if we really want to do Agile well, it has us looking across the enterprise, and we do look for a solution architecture for it. So we're going to go into more of the details, but the implications are there that it's not just a methodology for software. And even if it is there for software, that methodology does demand us to look at other areas of the organization to get support to do Agile well. This is listing out the courses. I would encourage you to go to the website to take a look at the descriptions of the courses, to see what interests you, And definitely get a hold of your WebAge Solutions sales representative to help you then organize maybe some training for your teams. So now into the meat of our conversation, scope of Agile architecture. So in this first section here in the overview, we're going to do just basically looking at the bigger picture and then trying to bring it back down into how does this relate to perhaps my Agile work. So looking up, the question is where to start. Now, again, what I've seen is obviously Agile, I mean the origins of Agile, which I'm sure most of you know, were done by a group of developers, lead developers, that were trying to figure out a better methodology addressing some of the challenges on software projects. Now, there's nothing wrong with adopting the Agile approach at that software development level without even much pre-thought. It's just really when you look at what is proposed as benefits of Agile, it does beg for planning, that to actually get the promised results, we need to actually do some building up of the business team. We need to make sure data knows how to work with us. The infrastructure needs to be there. And we need to have some coordination, not only across the business, but also across development teams. So the promised results may be somewhat elusive if you don't actually think beyond it's just for this project and it's just for software. So most Agile discussions are really just focused on that. But we really need to think about the fact that when we look at the manifest, when we look at the principles of Agile, it does propose a radical shift in how work gets done. Now, if anybody is online and not overly familiar with the Agile principles or the manifesto, I would encourage you right now just to open up a browser tab and Google Agile Manifesto and then Google Agile Principles, and it'll be right there in front of you. And you can start maybe looking at it while we're discussing, or maybe just bookmark it for reviewing after this discussion. Now, if you think of it, haven't you all heard that when the business says we're going Agile, that the way they mean Agile is that this is going to be faster and cheaper? Raise your hands if you've heard that said about Agile, that this is all about being faster and cheaper. Let me know if that's what you've heard. Yeah, so a number of you have definitely heard that. So this image here is the idea that we're going to rush, we're going to be able to fix you, it's going to be done very efficiently. Now, if that's true, that's definitely one of the goals that we have, but arguably some of the implications of Agile suggest that maybe, I'm not sure if we're going to get the whole thing out that way. But we definitely want to be working fast, producing high quality, and in order to do that, we actually have to have things at the ready. Like an emergency room can respond quickly because they're ready for it. They have all the equipment in place, they have all the people skilled in place, everybody's ready to just respond immediately. So before any Agile projects begin, we actually need to ready the environment so that we can actually do things quickly. Also, decisions about what should actually be treated that way. Again, this analogy with the emergency room. I don't know how many of you have had to go to the emergency room, but clearly they do some assessment to decide, well, which one is the emergency that we have to treat right away? Are you about to die, in other words? Or who can actually wait? So when we look at doing Agile, we have to make the same decision. What actually belongs to be treated in an Agile way? In other words, not everything necessarily needs that, and not everything would necessarily benefit from it. And there can be this tendency to be overzealous if everything has to be Agile. And again, what is actually meant by that? So the Agile Fit. Is there actually a need for Agile? So we have to ask that question about what's going on in the business. And then the next thing is, if we can see that Agile would be a benefit to the business, are we actually ready? Now this brings up in my mind the question of, when we look at it, this buzzword-driven architecture is an anti-pattern. So maybe this idea that everything's going to be Agile is simply a response to the buzz that Agile comes with. So I'm curious, in the group, how many of you are at organizations where you feel that it's just everything is trying to squish into this one box? How many of you are feeling that it's maybe overkill? We're trying to do it in too many places. So raise your hand if that's a little bit of what you're seeing in your organization. So I'm seeing a few hands. Okay, so you can lower your hands. That definitely not everybody's seeing it. So we can maybe say that there is enough understanding about it, but maybe this is another question for you. How many of you only see it as a methodology for your software projects? Is that the only place you're seeing it? Raise your hand if that's true. Okay, so we've got almost like a flip there. We've got a number of you where you're going, isn't this just about my software development? And why are we talking about everything else? Right? So, and again, that's a fine place to start. After all, that was the intent, was for software projects. But the more that we look at it and more the promises that we hear about, we start to see that it actually does have a bigger meaning. So when the decisions to do something are based just on the notion that everyone's doing it, so we should, it does invite problems and maybe miss marks. So careful consideration should be made as to when and where and how much Agile to actually do. So if I'm just thinking of it for software, is it being applied to all the software? And is that correct? If it's only being done to software, am I missing out on opportunities on other projects that could actually benefit from this kind of approach? So those are the kinds of questions we want to think about with this new opportunity to move things forward. Now, the other thing is the people factor. Now, raise your hand if you've actually read the manifesto and are familiar with the Agile principles. Okay, so we've got a few of you on that have. Those of you that didn't raise your hand for that, again, I would encourage you just to Google both of those things, Agile Manifesto and Agile Principles, so that you get an understanding. Now, when you read them, one of the things that you'll see is the emphasis on people, that this isn't about new technology per se. And arguably, Agile isn't even a software methodology. Agile is really a philosophy. It's really about thinking about the way in which people do things. So the people factor cannot be overstressed. When we're saying we're doing Agile, it's really about the way in which people work. So it's not enough just to say, go do Agile. We shouldn't just sort of box Agile as just a software methodology. As I said, it's actually not a methodology. What you have to do is find a software methodology that can work in an Agile way, right? So I imagine most of you that are involved in Agile projects have heard of Scrum or have heard of XP. Raise your hand if that's true. Maybe you're using one of those methodologies. Yeah, I can see a lot of you. You're familiar with that. So the methodology would be Scrum or would be XP or something along those lines. Agile is simply saying, now look at your Scrum and make it to follow the Agile Manifesto and principles. And again, when you balance the two out, you get more out of your software methodologies. So it's really about having people then trained to understand what Agile means and how that impacts the way they do their job. So we need to actually equip people to think in an Agile way, and of course have the skills then to apply the philosophy, and again having the resources as well to support them. So I hope you can appreciate just off that sort of that lead up, it clearly needs a plan. If we're going to go Agile, we need to think about it. If we're starting with the idea that we're only interested in Agile to improve software development, great. It does still ask the question of, well, what from the business actually qualifies for this kind of work? And it also we have to have the question of, well, what software methodology are we going to use that would allow us to do it in an Agile way? Also, are the people at the ready? Do they have the skills and the understanding? And is the technology there? Like, think of it, if we're really trying to achieve sort of one of the promises is that you're going to have frequent releases of software, in building the product over time, I actually need technology that can help me do it. So we're looking for the opportunities for automation. We look at the relationship moving from development through testing into production. We don't want to have any bottlenecks along that way. So we have to plan. We have to have the technology ready. We have to have the skills ready. We need to have the team set up in a way that reflects the Agile philosophy, which emphasizes collaboration and the involvement and relationship between developers and business. So Agile needs structure, and any structure needs planning. And so really, like as I sit here, if you're having issues trying to get more out of your Agile, or you're missing some marks, it's not that you plan to fail, it's that there simply wasn't the appropriate Agile structures in place. So you want to go back and take a look and see how you can correct it. Now, I'm wondering, with this guy standing in the corner, how he got out of that room. Did he wait until the paint dried, or did he actually get his shoes covered in red? All right, so the recommendation is that we really need to have support from the top, because if we're going to build the structure that's going to be reusable, going to be used by many teams that are doing projects using an Agile approach, we need to have the skills, we need to have coordination with the business, we need to have coordination with the other technical domains, in particular how we're going to interact with testing and operations. So for all of that coordination to happen, we do need the leaders to actually buy into this and to support that direction, because there's going to be work that's not software development that's going to happen in order to support those software development projects. So to get the best results, we know planning is needing. It's not just about the technical, but also about the people and the culture. Who's going to be involved, or who's impacted by doing Agile? So knowing the people is really, really important. So seeing who's going to actually work on the project, can they work in an Agile way? Agile actually, when you work on these, using these different methodologies in software projects, does invite more transparency about what's going on, and that the communication is more natural. The idea of whiteboarding things as you're thinking them out and others reviewing them, having regular conversations with the business about the requirements and inviting new requirements to keep coming in, definitely having fewer meetings, fewer documents that you're actually creating, and that the emphasis is really about the software that you're going to deliver. So using an Agile software project as an example, you can still see all the coordination that has to happen, and we need to make sure people understand that. And we need to make sure people allocate the appropriate time and resources to supporting the Agile project. So in order to do this, I really need to step back and see the bigger picture, so I can see the Agile opportunities and start building from there. So those of you that are in organizations where you're working on software projects, raise your hand if you feel that you're getting the right kind of support from leadership, that you have access to the resources you need, that there aren't any obstacles, that you're free to create and move ahead. So raise your hand if you're experiencing that already. Okay, so a few of you. How many of you are going, oh my goodness, I wish I had that? If you're going, there's still some huge gaps, I feel like I could do better if they gave me more resources. Raise your hand if you're on that wish list. Please help me. Okay, yeah, so definitely a few more there. So you want to be able to start encouraging. Now, I don't know what roles you're in at work. Obviously, if you're an architect, you're in a really good position to take that leadership role. If you're an application architect, you can definitely influence what's happening with the resources that your application teams have, but you'll probably want to look to your enterprise architecture team to say, can we do more coordination across projects? Can we share more of this and I have better ideas? To collaborate in building a more robust Agile system that can support individual Agile projects. If you're one of those leaders, then you're invited to really start taking a look at your organization as a whole to see more opportunities for Agile, and then to actually then plan ahead and build up the systems to give more of a backbone to your Agile projects. So starting at the top, because we have to make an investment in order to get more out of the projects. As a developer on a team, I just want to focus on being creative, solving the problem, getting the release out. I want the tools at the ready. And if I realize we don't have the tool and I do a tool identification, I want to be able to have that tool given to me without any sort of overhead where I have to, fill in forms and wait months in order to get permission to use something different. All right, so where do we actually see Agile happening? So Agile, when you look at the manifesto and principles, you start to see this theme coming out. So Agile is really, really good when you see these key characteristics. Now, these are not the only characteristics, but these are foundational. Now, in order to really ascertain if a proposed product needs support through Agile, you need to have some objectivity. And again, this is where architecture can come in, because architects can actually ask the right questions about the product and about the situation to then deem if we're actually going to benefit from doing Agile. So aggressive deadlines is one characteristic. Now, of course, if you're a business product owner, you're going to say, well, of course, my product is needed yesterday. There's always going to be having this sense of urgency about it. So the next question is, if I'm asking for aggressiveness, is can you tolerate having the product delivered in increments over time? If you're expecting the full product in its completion to be delivered in just a couple of weeks instead of a year, then you're barking up the wrong tree. Agile in and of itself doesn't lessen the amount of software development effort that's needed to deliver. What we're thinking of is, could I deliver just a little bit of it earlier and deliver it in pieces then, so that over the course of the year, you've started to benefit from some of it being released. The other thing that Agile is really good at helping us with is high degree of complexity. So notice that those of you that have been working on projects, working with the different methodologies, you talk about having regular discussions, so daily reviews. Short though, right? You're not spending hours in these meetings. It's like a short, like 10, 15 minutes. Let's just check in with each other, make sure everything's good. Definitely inviting new requirements. So when you're doing Agile, we're looking at the idea that I don't know everything up front, so I get new requirements over time. They come in pieces, and when I identify a set that allows me to build a feature, that's what I focus on. And that because of the complexity, we are looking to have different expertise to sit there and actually collaborate on coming up with ideas. So collaborative problem solving. And again, who are you inviting to that discussion? And in Agile, we're saying that it shouldn't just be the software development team. There should be the testers there. There should be the business there. The architect should be there. And arguably, for some of these discussions, we should be inviting in maybe representatives from networking, from the servers, like infrastructure. We should be talking to data experts, security experts. So when we get requirements, do we have easy and quick access to the expertise that we need in order to actually break the problem down so that we can then start solving it? The other thing that we look for in Agile is that there's a high degree of uniqueness. Big part of Agile is that it encourages innovations. So when I look at this list and I see some of the products that come down and I look at the product, do we already know how to build this? Do we really need to treat it in an iterative way? Is it going to require complex problem solving? Do we know all the requirements up front? If I know all the requirements up front, if it's not highly unique and it's not complex and challenging, then I'm going to be saying, you know what, I can just use a traditional development approach. We don't have to bring in the big guns for this. We can just actually keep doing what we've been doing for a long time. So we want to make sure that we're not overusing Agile in the sense that there is specialized resources and teams. Not all products actually can tolerate being delivered in pieces, right? And if that's true, then again, it doesn't really fit with the way Agile wants to treat it. So that leads nicely into the fact and reality that Agile is not the end-all be-all. Agile is not the solution to everything. There are situations where we really see that Agile would struggle. One of them, and again, focusing on people, would be culture. So if you're in an organization or in part of an organization that is a highly controlled, procedural driven work occurs, then it may not work well to do Agile. Remember, Agile is really about being innovative and going out there. Another place where you can really struggle to have success with Agile is when you have teams that are large and global. And so one of the things we talk about, remember, is the focus on the way in which we do work. So a cornerstone for Agile is the fact that we want to have teams working together. They should get to know each other. They should be able to build up a rhythm. I mean, any of you know about rowing, you know, in the Olympics or in top competitions? Could you imagine trying to build a rowing team where the team members are across the globe? You know, you want them together so every day they can get out in the water and row together. Think of that with any team. Maybe I should have used hockey as an analogy, since we're going into winter, right? So the team needs time together to get to know each other, to figure out the best way to work, and this is one of the things that Agile encourages. Now, we're not saying that you couldn't do Agile when you have people spread around the globe, but definitely it does make it very difficult, and there has to be some strategy behind how you're going to organize the people to make that work. Agile does not work when we have well-defined, well-working procedures. So if it's predictable and repeatable, then a factory approach would be better. We don't need to have innovations. We don't have to have new requirements every day. Like if we have everything up front and we know what we're doing, then choose a different style of organizing the people and the work. Now, I'm curious, how many of you have actually thought of this? Did you ever think that Agile is not for everything? Are you one of those that already knew this? Raise your hand if you're going, I get that, I'm on that. You're preaching to the choir with this one. Okay, so a few of you. So for those of you that this is somewhat new, that's definitely a takeaway, to go back and ask those questions, push back a little bit and say, really, is this the best way to do it, right? Not everything should be treated with that Agile approach. We also see false starts. Now, one of the false starts kind of goes back to what I was saying a bit earlier about that buzzword-driven approach to things. It could be everybody else is doing it, everybody else is talking about their success, so we can be overly eager, thinking that any place that I'm having a problem, any place where I'm thinking it's not happening fast enough, and yeah, I want new releases too, that it's basically setting us up to actually force Agile where it doesn't fit. Recall the previous slide, that when it doesn't work, also look at where it does work. So if we're not really needing Agile, if we don't have a high degree of uniqueness, if it isn't really complex, if we already know all the requirements up front, then it's really a false start. The other one is Agile resistance. So they say they want Agile, but meanwhile, they keep calling us to meetings. They keep asking us to provide documentation. They keep limiting the resources we have access to. So, you know, very prescriptive, and that the culture itself isn't supporting it. They haven't changed the way they work. They say we're Agile, but we're not seeing the results because we're not actually behaving Agile. Now, enterprise architecture specifically, but definitely any level of architecture, is really meant to mitigate these things, to see these false starts and to correct it, to provide the system and to help champion the Agile teams. Now, I'm curious, in the group here, how many of you are actually experiencing the handicap of Agile resistance, where they've said they want Agile, but you don't feel that they're supporting it? So raise your hand for that one. Okay, so we've definitely got a few that are suffering. So again, make sure that they understand, like if you just take these two slides, indicators for Agile and when Agile doesn't work. If you take those two slides and have a conversation with your team or your leadership about that, then you can start to identify, we can give you good results if we could correct this. All right, so let's get down to something a little bit more practical. So we see the set. Now understand the scope. Have we seen the picture? We can't just treat Agile as a software methodology. First, because it's a philosophy, not a methodology. Secondly, because that philosophy is all about really changing the way we work, we need to have systems in place to make it happen. So it's a correction to the people and an adjustment in the skill set. And also the processes and procedures have to actually work in the same way, iterative, responsive, and then we also need to have the technology there to automate where we can and to coordinate better between development and the back end. So let's get down to what we can actually do to get more out of it. So connecting the dots. So the first thing is I really do want to hear leadership express it, so you can have the business strategy that says we're doing Agile. We want to have enterprise architects then interpret that vision down into practical implementations. So you can see there with improving performance, getting better alignment between the different areas of an organization, being more responsive, using agility in the English term, does definitely then suggest that there's a place for it. Now, arguably, I really have seen Agile be a benefit to architects. Architects need to treat their work in a more Agile way. So enterprise architecture programs should be leveraging the Agile philosophy. Now, here's a good question for you guys. How many of you cringe at the thought of governance? The idea that, oh, there's governance, they're going to slow me down. They're going to probably say no to something that I really want. How many of you have that sort of negative response to the idea of governance? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, so lower your hand. Now, here's the other question. How many of you go, I really like the governance support that I get? They're there for me when I need them. I can ask them for resources and they really support me. They're very supportive. They're not policing me, they're supporting me. So I see one hand. Well, I'm really happy that you're getting it, and I'm sad that the rest of you aren't. But this is definitely something that the enterprise architecture program, leveraging the principles from Agile, can actually improve the way that they engage all of their stakeholders, being, development teams, technical teams, building systems, and business people, how we engage them. So having the strategy, then seeing the vision and how to apply it, I can use Agile techniques to actually improve the architecture, as well as identifying and building up an Agile solution architecture program so that I can support Agile projects better. We make sure that the right products are going through the Agile stream and that the people are appropriately involved and that the technology is in place and that any new technology is being tested out and it's done quickly and responsibly. So we're responding to the enterprise architecture vision, clarifying what it means to be Agile. And in organizations that have that message of be Agile, it needs to be followed up with what does that mean? How does that change my work? So let's get the enterprise architecture program involved. So enterprise architecture is going to respond to the needs of the business, to have rapid delivery of high quality software. And when and how to best adopt the Agile approach actually needs to be planned out and needs to be done to support the teams. We can't just expect it to happen magically. So arguably, if leadership in business has said we want to be Agile, the enterprise architecture program should have actually initiated an Agile solution architecture program to tackle all of the issues so that we can see the indicators for business, we can get the technology and people ready for it, so business has to participate, developers need to work differently, and that we have all of the resources at the ready. And then, as I mentioned, we want EA to start an Agile Solution Architecture program. Now, this is to create that common Agile environment. What is common across all the Agile projects? What do we see works? And of course, this can be built over time, and we learn by doing. So you might start off with one approach and find out that it works in some places but not others. And again, this is what I want Solution Architecture program to do. And that we actually then think about what does it mean to be timely, and where are the experts, and do they know about Agile? Do they understand it? Can they be quickly called upon to just sort of jump off what they're doing and jump into helping out an Agile team? And that obviously the Solution Architecture program then would be looking at equipping the different domains to be at the ready in the appropriate fashion. And that as we do this more and more, we're going to mature as an Agile shop. So when Agile work is actually managed at the Solution Architecture level, we're looking at the common needs across all the Agile projects so that we can address them. And that all Agile projects are going to have shared resources that they can draw from, and we're going to keep building up those shared resources. There may be a new thing that comes up. It may be a one-off, but if we see the opportunity, solution architects are going to add it to those set of resources. And this actually then, because we can draw from a shared set of resources, we are going to increase the speed at which teams can actually work. Now, the other thing that we want the Solution Architecture program to do is to actually share the learning. So the idea, if something really works well, let's promote it. Let's tell the other teams about it. And if something really didn't work at all, let's make sure that other teams know not to do certain things, right? We tested it out here and it was a real fail, so things to avoid. And again, I don't think that it's appropriate, like developers on the Agile teams are focused on doing their releases. This is where we need to have another role that's overseeing all of this to actually build them up and improve it. So solution architecture is there to do this. Here, let's do one more survey. So raise your hand if you already are in an organization that has an Agile Solution Architecture program that is doing all of the things I just talked about. Excellent. Okay, so, oh, that's really good. I got a few more hands. That's exciting to hear. So you're definitely getting, you're moving ahead. And again, just like our software being a product that we release over time because we don't know all the requirements, think of it, that's the definition of architecture. I don't know everything all up front. So based on the requirements I have, I can give you something. And the more we do it, the more we can build, the better it gets. So here is the Agile Enterprise big picture. Now again, probably when you get the slides, you can take a closer look at this. And this comes from Scaling Software Agility. You can see the information at the bottom of the picture. So the solution architecture then is the vehicle for realizing that business idea of going Agile. And it's the responsibility of the solution architect program then to coordinate across the domains, as well as providing that supportive governance. Now, just as a heads up, if you were to take that governance plan program, we talk about different frameworks. A big idea in Agile governance is not to have processes for it, but to actually have it event-driven, more service-oriented. So what are the different kinds of events that can happen? And then you basically say, this is my event, so then you kind of push for that service. And then also maybe even thinking about how some governance tasks can actually be self-serve and thereby freeing up some of the resources. So coordination across the domains, providing the governance is what we're looking for from the Agile Solution Architecture program. So for Agile, this ensures that we can actually get expeditious mitigation of issues. When we identify new technology we want to use, we're going to get the support to quickly evaluate it so that we can integrate it as part of our solution. Remember that we're dealing with complex and unique systems when we're doing Agile software development. So it's going to be needing that kind of responsiveness. And, and that we want as well to make sure that we have the skills and the knowledge to work with this. So making sure that there's appropriate training at the ready, and that we can even get that training done during projects when the issues come up. Like, how quickly can you coordinate getting training resources? How quickly can you ramp up different skills? So notice here that we have in this picture as well that we have the vision for the products of the portfolio, and then we also have the architecture runway. A lot of architecture is going to happen before a project even starts, and it will continue to be produced to support the next releases. So we have that coordination that has to happen. And again, that would be part of implementing the solution architecture program to make sure the architecture is at the ready and being built over time, just as the products are being built over time. So part of the scope then of Agile is to go beyond the software development team to reach up to the architecture team and to make sure that we have solution architecture. So while the Agile architect, so the application architect that is supporting the software development team is there, what we need to have them do is make sure that they understand they got to be 2 or 3 iterations ahead of the actual software development. So that architect needs to see the bigger picture, needs to know what's coming downstream, needs to understand the relationships between systems. And again, for them to have that resource at the ready to be able to do that kind of work, that application architect supporting Agile needs to get support, needs to have some coordination of this. So many Agile projects actually fail due to poor communication and weak team structure. So what we want to do is proactively address these known pitfalls. And again, this is where the solution architecture program can help us, and also mitigate when we didn't plan properly to do the corrective actions that are needed. So we need on our access to the other domains. It's not just about software. Software needs systems to run on, so we think of the servers, we think of the network. Software uses data, so we think of the data systems. And software is delivering to the business. So we need the business people to talk to us about what's going on. So if we think of architecture, we talk about being organized by domains, different disciplines, that every single discipline is participating in Agile projects in some way. So we have the unique and specific involvement of each domain, and it has to be done in an Agile way. So even though they may not be working on any Agile projects, they're just supporting their system, we need to have some Agile knowledge in those domains to be able to be responsive to our Agile team. So traditional application development approach, where we just sort of sat and focused on our software, is no longer what we're doing, because we're constantly experimenting. We're coming up with new releases that have implications to both data and infrastructure in terms of the technology, as well as needing to understand the direction that the business is going. Here's a visual to represent what I was just talking about. Now in this visual, it's really talking about how Agile is complemented by DevOps. How many of you are in an organization where DevOps is happening? Just raise your hand if you are. So no one? No one with DevOps? Okay, one. All right, so this is definitely something to think about. Now, there are other ways, maybe a better way to ask the question instead of talking officially about DevOps. What about CI, continuous integration? Are you working with tools and resources with CI, continuous integration? Raise your hand if that's the case. Okay, seeing maybe just a couple more hands. Definitely Agile, like if you think of it, I'm trying to build a product and we're supposed to have these quick releases. I need as much that's mundane and predictable to be automated. I need to, it's great, like if you look at this picture, I've got the business and they're ready and they're engaging the Agile development team. So Agile addresses this piece of it, the business to development. But we're saying that we're going to release every couple of weeks. If we don't have a plan for how we're going to pass this down the pipe to get it up in production, right? If we don't have coordination with operations, then we can be as fast as we want on development teams, but the business isn't going to see the results because we're going to just end up in this long queue waiting for approvals and production releases. So we want to, DevOps is definitely an approach that can help fix this. We talk about continuous integration and tools that automate the process of launching it from the development environment through testing into production. So again, this would be something else that the solution architecture program could and should address. To have some kind of plan to fill in the gap of going from development into production and the different systems that we have to go through. So we had our EA vision, we have our SA vision, the solution architecture vision. We also need the application vision. So the application domain then, in addition to, like, we have the architecture for that Agile project, but think of the domain as a whole. We're going to create environment for the developers. So it consists of work that spans different use cases, different platforms, and over time, the application architect then needs to actually have a vision about all the different Agile work that's going to be going on. Identify what's actually going to be shared between projects. So we can have shared sets, different buckets. So Agile will be one option that can be used for software development, but it's not, you know, for everything, as we said earlier. So the application architect should be planning for that, being able to look at which teams are going to be best and which methodology should be used for the different work that's coming in to the application domain. So here's a little bit of a vision graphic for you. So doing Agile then, the application architecture vision, obviously having planning. Notice here, looking at our different tools, our different methodologies for analysis, different techniques that we would have there, seeing use cases, user stories, making sure that we're doing the design. So how do we draw it out so that everybody understands what we're doing? So again, Agile isn't prescribing which techniques, which tools to use. It's just saying, you know, make sure you've got those at the ready. And then with building, making sure that we have the right software for it. Testing, looking at automating more of it. We need to have testers as part of the team so that we can start designing the testing and then it's ready to just run. So automated testing is a big piece, but definitely thinking of acceptance, test-driven approaches or just test-driven development. And then deployment, so continuous integration, continuous deployment, and then making sure that we review it so we can improve the system over time. So this is a nice graphic giving you that checklist to handle it in the application level. So we have the different levels. So the scope of Agile crosses all domains. Scope of Agile requires the different levels of attention, application up to solution, up to enterprise, to the business leadership. So that's a taste of some of what we would talk about in the Architecture for Agile Projects course. But I hope that even just with that little bit of a taste that you feel that you've got some information you can go back to. It's either validated the work that you're doing or maybe inspired some new ideas. So raise your hand if you feel that you've been able to get some good takeaways, something to go back to work with to help you with your Agile work. Just raise your hand and let me know if this was helpful for you. Great, thank you. So we're coming to the end of the webinar, just coming up to 10 to 1. Just a reminder that you should check out the website for the courses. And if you have trouble seeing them, contact WebAge to ask them about it. And now, given that I've ended the presentation, is there anybody with questions? So I'll stay online for any questions. Check out the WebAge website. And if there aren't any questions, feel free to grab yourself a refreshment before you head back to work. And I wish you all a very good weekend since it's Friday. And thank you very much for attending.